I'll show you all the items that I had to collect to make the ammo can stove, and then I'm going to proceed to step 2. You will always start with step 1, which is don't make an ammo can stove. Not unless you're absolutely confident in your own ability to do so, and you understand and are willing to accept all the risk involved in both making and using one. These are the items I've got together for my ammo can stove, starting with the ammo can, and I've got the 50 caliber variety. A lot of sources for these. I got mine at Harbor Freight. Around the inside perimeter of this lid underneath, there's a rubber gasket. That's going to have to come out because it would just melt, so I'm replacing it with stove gasket rope. This is 5/16, and it comes in a kit with the cement to glue it into place. Almost all my hardware is going to be the same. 1/4 inch machine screws that are 3/4 of an inch long, and this pack came with standard nuts, but for the most part I'm going to be using these flange nuts, and I got flange nuts because I wanted to glue them into place, and I'll use JB Weld around the flange. To go with the machine screws and nuts, I'm using star lock washers, but any kind of lock washer would work. And the hinge for the door in the front is the standard 3-inch hinge, and I got this one. It's a little better quality than the least expensive. I liked it because it was black. There's very little play in the hinge knuckle, and the mounting holes are 1/4 inch, so I can use my 1/4 inch machine screws without having to re-drill these out. For the legs, I'm going to use this material. It's 1 inch by 1 inch steel angle. It's 1/8 of an inch thick, and the legs are going to look like this. 6 inches long with a notch cut out and 2 holes to bolt them at the corners of the stove. I'll use expanded metal in the bottom of the stove for a grate to hold the wood up off the bottom of the stove so it doesn't rust out so quickly, and also so air can circulate better underneath the wood. One of the first things I'm going to do is strip the paint from the can, because if I just tried to burn it off, it would burn off unevenly, and then I'd have problems repainting it. So I'm going to just forestall any problems with that and strip it all off entirely. I got 15-minute stripper, and to apply it, I've got heavy-duty paint stripping gloves. I'm not going to try and use the latex or nitrile type. And to repaint it back, I've got high temp paint, both primer and 2 colors of paint. This is high temp gasket maker, and this is JB Weld Extreme Heat. I'll be using this to fill some holes. And I've also got standard 2-part JB Weld epoxy, and that's what I'm going to use to glue the flange nuts into place. A few more items. This is POR 15. It's a rust inhibitive type paint used in the automotive industry, and I'm going to paint the bottom of my ammo can with it that's going to be the weak point where it rusts out. So POR 15 should eliminate that, really. And it comes as a kit with 2 types of metal prep. My flue system, my chimney system, is going to be 3-inch, and this is galvanized ductwork, so it's totally inappropriate for the job, but that's what I'm using. I've got 2 5-foot long 3-inch galvanized pipes. I've got a 3-inch rain cap. I've got a 3-inch damper, and this is called a start collar. I had to get this at Menards, the only place I could find it, but an HVAC person would drill a 3-inch hole in existing ductwork, put this in, and then bend the flanges in to hold it in place and start 3-inch ductwork. So I'm going to use it the same way in the top of my stove. I got some sheet metal. This is 16 gauge. I started trying 22 gauge, but it was just too thin. So 16 gauge I'm much happier with. It's much stiffer. This is what I'll make my door and some other parts from. You can also see I have an assortment of jigs and drilling guides, and I'll show you those as I build the stove. But most important of all, I've got some safety equipment, safety glasses, and leather gloves for when I'm using especially sheet metal. I'll start with the lid, and the handle needs to come off. I'd like to be able to keep it to carry the stove around, but it's going to be in the way of where I'm going to drill the hole for my chimney, and I want a flat top on my stove so I can cook on top. The handle is held on with these 2 straps, and these straps are held on with 4 spot welds each.
So to break a spot weld, I just need to drill through the little dimple here, only drilling through the top layer of metal. I don't want to put a hole in the lid right there. So I'll drill these 8 spot welds out, and then I should be able to pop it off. Underneath the lid, here's that rubber gasket, and I'll just go ahead and take it out. And you can see there's an inner lid liner. This needs to come out also, and it's held on with 10 spot welds. But I can't drill through from this side. I'll have to drill these 10 spot welds out also from the top, and I'm not anxious to put 10 holes in my lid, but these I'll come back and fill with the extreme heat JB weld. And before I pop it out, I'm also going to drill 1/4 inch holes through these 2 bumps, these 2 bosses that are at the latch end of the lid, all the way through the lid and the lid liner. We'll do that over at the drill press. I'll start by drilling through the bumps, through holes with 1/4 inch drill bit, and then I'll drill out the 8 spot welds for these straps holding the handle on. And this is what drilling out those spot welds should look like. Now I can use a big screwdriver and pop those loose. And now I can drill out these 10 spot welds holding on this inner lid. And they look like this. Now from the back side, I'll get a big screwdriver behind this inner lid and pop it loose. And there's no pretty way of doing this. You just have to get a screwdriver in behind here and pop each one loose like that. And now, because I'm going to repurpose this lid liner to be the baffle inside the stove, I'm going to flatten it out using, well, a hammer and a mallet. And that's good enough. Now I'm ready for stripping the paint off. I've got the stripper in an aluminum dish with a lid, and I'm wearing my gloves and I've got my safety glasses on. I'm going to be using an old brush, and I'll be doing a section at a time. I'll brush it on pretty heavily. I'll leave it for at least 15 minutes, and then we'll come back. I'll get these cleaned up like the lid liner, and then it will be time to drill a hole for the chimney. I've got the workpiece clamped to the drill press table. I would not try and hold it in my hands when using this 3-inch hole saw. And the hole saw is made of bimetal, so it's used for cutting metal. I've got the workpiece 1.5 inches from the edge of the hole saw, and it's centered side to side. Not the only way to cut the hole, but it is going to leave the cleanest hole. And it makes a really big noise. Here's the 3-inch disc that was cut out for the chimney system. I drilled a centered 1/4 inch hole, and I drilled a smaller peripheral hole. I'm going to repurpose this disc to be this. It's going to help adjust the ventilation in the door. So this peripheral hole, the smaller one, is for a small hardwood dowel that I'll use to be able to adjust it. And now you're seeing the first of those drilling jigs. When I cut this 3-inch disc out, the hole saw left some flash around the outside edge. And I'm going to need to take that back to the drill press and use the hole saw again to cut that off. So in this drilling jig, I'm going to put the disc on there, and I've got a piece of 1/4 inch hardwood that'll go on top with a hole through it. I'm going to use a wood screw through those holes to keep it from spinning. And then I'll take it over to the drill press, and I'll use the hole saw again to remove that flash. Because the jig is so small relative to the size of this hole saw, I'm going to screw it to the drill press table. Next, I want to drill 4 holes in the disc. These are 9/16 of an inch in diameter, and I've got a drilling jig for that. And it's the same drilling jig I'll use for the door, so the holes will line up. Now I don't want to go right for 9/16 and drill it all at once. I'm going to start small with a 1/4 inch drill bit and work my way up until I get to 9/16, because starting out with this size drill bit, I would get a lot of tear out. It's likely the bit would wander, and it just doesn't make a good hole. Another option, if you don't have large drill bits like that, this is an inexpensive step drill bit set from Harbor Freight, about $9. Over at the drill press again. I've drilled smaller holes, and now I'm ready for the 9/16 inch bit. I'm going to have 2 sources of ventilation in my stove. This disc I just cut out that's going to spin, and then below that there's going to be a slider, and these 2 are both cut out of sheet metal. The door is 4 inches tall, 5.5 inches wide, and the sliding piece is 1.5 inches tall, and I'll start out 6 inches long, but I'll probably cut some of that off. Sheet metal is fairly easy to cut with a jigsaw with a metal cutting blade, or a hacksaw works almost as well. For the sliding part of the ventilation, I've made a mark 1.5 inches wide. I'll be sure and cut on the waist side of the line, and then I'll sand up to it. And I'm wearing gloves because lots of sharp edges. In my workpiece, I've made 4 marks, and it's for these holes. These are the ones that allow it to slide. They're centered side to side, and they're 1/2 inch apart, and I'll clean out the web of material in between each set of 2 holes, and that's what allows it to slide. So I've set my fence so the drill bit will be automatically centered in between the two sides, and I've made marks from end to end where these holes need to be. Now to drill the 8 vent holes, these are a 1/2 inch in diameter and they're exactly 1 inch apart. I've made marks 1 inch apart and I've got my fence set up so that the center of the bit is exactly 5/16 of an inch from this outside edge. I've also marked my step bit with the 1/2 inch mark. I'm actually going to stop 1 step shy of that, and then I'll turn the workpiece over and drill that last step. It just makes a better hole on both sides. Now I'll drill the rest of them. I finished drilling the holes in the door, the disc, and the slider. So for the door, I'm going to drill 4 holes in the corners of the door opening and then use the jigsaw to cut out the opening. For the slider, I'm going to drill 2 holes 1/4 inch in the can, and that's going to be for the bolts that will allow the slider to slide back and forth. And I'll use those 2 holes to bolt the drilling jig to the can, and then I'll be able to drill those 1/2 inch holes in the bottom of the can. I want to get these holes aligned properly, so I've clamped my drilling guide to the base of the can. I'm going to drill in these 2 right-hand holes, the 1/4 inch ones. Looks pretty good. Now I'll finish these 2 holes and I'll cut between them. I drilled all 4 holes and I used a Dremel cutoff wheel to make starter slots so my jigsaw would fit in it. And now I'll cut from both sides and finish the cutout. I've got the drilling guide for the ventilation slider bolted through those 2 holes. I've already pre-drilled with 1/4 inch holes, and these 4 I've already done with 1/2 inch. Now I'll finish these last 4. Now, so that this can actually slide, I'll grind out the web in between these 2 holes and the ones under the clamp. Now I'll clean that up with a file and I'll do the other one. That looks like it turned out like I wanted. Now I need to attach these short dowels as handles I've already drilled a small through hole here. I'll need to drill one here also. The way I'm going to attach them is with a small wood screw. And I'll countersink in back of the steel for the screw head and drill a small hole in the dowel to accept the screw over the drill press. And there are those. Next, put the hinge on. Basically, it's just lining up the door, marking the holes, and drilling them. Door came out like I wanted it to. When I'm finished, I'll cut these long bolts off with a cutoff wheel in the Dremel, also the ones on the inside. I did go ahead and make a couple other small parts, a latch, and the catch that it's going to go into. So I'll drill holes for these two and get those installed. And that will be the latch. Almost ready to take apart and paint. One more thing. The legs, I'll make 4 of these. These holes were drilled too close together, but I've showed you this earlier. 6 inches long from the angled steel. 1.5 inch cutout, which I'll cut out with the jigsaw. I'll sand it and then paint it with primer and paint. I'm going to use this drilling jig at all 4 corners, just so I have the holes consistent. So I'll take all the other stuff off, I'll drill the holes for these legs, and then I'll make the legs. We got the holes drilled at all 4 corners. Now I want to make the legs. So I've got 4 of those cut 6 inches long. And I need to make the notch, and I need to make the notch on the right hand side on 2 of them, and on the left hand side on the other 2. So I'll use the Dremel with cutoff wheel, and I'll cut across and this way. The legs are finished, and I'm ready to apply POR 15 to the outside bottom and the inside bottom. I'm going to show you the outside bottom, so just know that everything you see here I'm going to also do on the inside. POR 15 is a 3-step process. I'll use the cleaner degreaser, which is what I've got now. And you have to flood the area and keep it wet. You also don't want to get any of the 3 steps on your skin, or breathe it, or drink it. The second step is to use metal prep. And I'll keep the surface wet with it for about 20 minutes. The cleaner degreaser I rinsed off with water. And now to apply the POR 15 itself. Want to make sure the bottom is absolutely dry. And using a foam brush, I just want to be careful not to get it around the rim, because if I do, when I put the lid back on, it would never come off again. Now to fill these 10 holes in the lid, I've got the JB Weld Extreme Heat. I taped on the back side with blue painter's tape so the product wouldn't just fall through. I stirred the product for about 3 minutes. Now I'll just apply it. I primed most of the parts and painted some of them. The lid I need to finish painting so I can glue the stove gasket on the inside of it. The lid liner I haven't begun to prime yet because I need to bend it to be the stove baffle over at the workbench. For the lid liner, it's going to be the baffle underneath the lid, and that's why I drilled these 2 holes through those bumps. And I'm going to bend the lid liner like this. And then I'll bolt it back underneath the lid, and that will be the baffle that will stop heat from rushing straight out the chimney. It'll have to go by the baffle first. I've done 2 coats of primer. Now I'm going to do 2 coats of the flat black, and then I'll be ready for the stove gasket rope. To cement in the stove gasket rope, I'll squeeze a bead of the cement that came in the kit around this outside perimeter and then press the rope into place. And that will take about 3 or 4 hours to dry. Now I've got the stove gasket glued into place. That'll take several hours to dry, and I've made sure to push it up against the edges and into the corners. This is the expanded metal I'm going to use to make the grate in the bottom of the stove. It's going to hold the wood up off the bottom of the stove 1.5 inches. I need to cut it to size, and it is possible to cut it by hand. It's just not much fun. So I'm going to use a jigsaw. I need to cut it 8.5 inches wide and 10 3/4 of an inch long. Now to bend the sides down, I've ripped a 2x6 board down to 5.25 inches wide, and I've centered the expanded metal on it. I'll clamp another board on top, and then I'll bend the sides down using a hammer and a mallet. Another way would just be to drape it over the edge of a cabinet or some sort of work surface and bend it down that way. And now I'll cut these notches in the corners so they can clear the bolts for the legs. The last thing before I assemble it, I'm going to install this start collar in the 3-inch opening in the lid, and I'm going to do it with the high temp gasket maker. I don't want to use any kind of permanent cement because this is going to be the weak point of the stove. This is going to rust. After I burn it, I'll burn the galvanizing off. I'll come back and spray paint it, but it's still going to rust. This part is 2 1/4 inches tall, so I cut a block 2 1/4 inches tall also. All the smoking on the outside of the ammo can is done. All the smoke now is going out the chimney. A few final thoughts. The expanded metal grate worked a treat. I fully expected it to sag from the heat, but it didn't at all, so happy with that. The lid did warp. I ran the stove without this baffle in place, and now I've got it in place, so you can see the lid got kind of twisty, but not so much that it doesn't seal back down. The latch forces it back in place, and there's no leaks around the perimeter of it, so that's fine. On the bottom, the POR 15 didn't last. It did bubble up and went away, so I'm going to have to just repaint that with the high temp Rust-Oleum. I also ran the stove without the flue damper in place, so I'm going to now install that on this short 2-foot piece of the galvanized ductwork. I'm going to install the flue in it, and I need to drill 2 holes diametrically opposed to each other. And the way to get those exact, I've taped a strip of paper around the flue and marked where the edge overlaps. I take it off and line those back up again, and then I folded it in half and I crease the edges and mark those creases. And when I put it back on the flue, I marked where those creases are. And I've already drilled small holes. Now I'm going to drill holes that will match the diameter of the rod. Today is the 4th of July, so I've got 4 or 5 months before I actually use this out in the field. So over the next 4 or 5 months, I'm going to really be putting it through its paces. Burning a combination of hard and softwoods in it, just checking for weak spots. I'll report back before the end of the season, before the beginning of the winter season. In my next video, I'll be making the hot tent teepee that this stove is going to go in. Guys, thanks for watching.